Thanks, everybody. Thank you for OhioX for hosting us here today. Really appreciate working relationship with Chris and OhioX team. It's truly an honor to kind of be a part of the great vision that they've started here back in early December and watch them kind of continue to grow. We were introduced to Chris and Ari and the rest of the team probably late last fall, and it's just been truly amazing to see the traction that they've gained. So pleased that we're obviously given an opportunity here today to kind of talk with you about a very real conversation here, about a very relevant conversation to many of our business owners. So again, delighted here to kind of be here today to talk about these items. Just want to kind of put this disclaimer out here. Obviously, our conversation with cash management is really kind of part of a larger conversation as we think about the COVID-19 situation. And I would encourage any business owner to hop over to kind of our COVID-19 resource page. Our real effort here, and we try to follow, OhioX's motto is really just providing our business community here in Northeast Ohio, especially great resources to kind of manage, the situations that their current business is in. We're fortunate from, who we serve here in Northeast Ohio. Everybody's got a lot of different, obviously, businesses, industries, and situations. So if you hop over there, we hope that you'll find at least a few things that are relevant to you. So, check that out as we kind of go through. Where we kind of want to really focus, though, today on our objectives is kind of threefold here. Is really kind of start to take a look at, how do we secure a business future, but where are we today? And I think it's important to kind of reflect back on that piece, reflect, where we've kind of come, and then more importantly, then start to pivot towards how do we lead our business, through this situation. And when you really think about, securing your business future, this is all about you, right? And it's all about finding your business needs from a cash management position and putting your business in a position to thrive survive and then thrive. So what we're hoping here today is to eventually then leave with an action plan that provides you a roadmap and a guide so that you can take that back to your organizations and really kind of start to implement things that are going to work from you. And if anybody's kind of followed us here through recent webinars from our own Apple account, we've done a few of these, but what we want to do here today is a little bit different in the sense of really putting together some good tactics and objectives that we can kind of all take back, really start to ask ourselves and our finance teams these critical questions and sometimes these hard questions, but how can we really kind of put that into place to be successful from that standpoint? So where are we today? What I want all of us to do here is remember back to basically a Wednesday afternoon in February 19th, and really start to think about how quickly kind of the world started to spin the opposite way. The Dow Jones on February 19th was at about 29,000. Unemployment was sitting at 3.5, and our lovely communication platform Zoom stock was at about $90. Since then, obviously, we've had a lot transpire. We've gotten to see Mike DeWine on a daily basis. The term shelter in place has become now just a secondary term. And CARES Act and a ton of other stimulus, 3 actually thus far, have been released to the public to help support and stand up our financial economy. But what does this really mean to you, right? A lot of things out there. What does this mean to you? It really means that, how we do business has changed, right? And how we interact has changed, and how we live has changed. So the real question that we got to ask ourselves is when we think about cash management, how has that changed? We've all gone through different cash flow analysis. We've all gone through different projections, but not under these COVID-19 times. To take what I just kicked off about the February 19th data, sitting here today at business close yesterday, the Dow Jones now is at about 23, unemployment's at 14.7. and the Zoom stock's at 165. So how have we changed the way we manage our cash flow? And I think that's super critical to really kind of think about and ask ourselves. So, we can go through this exercise of going to Google News, typing in COVID-19, effects, and we probably get 1,000 articles. And I think what we can kind of really start to see here is we're starting to feel the impact of cash situations. We're starting to see bankruptcies starting to tick up. We're starting to see businesses really starting to feel the squeeze of these situations. Obviously with a lot of the stimulus money out there, it's really affecting, the business owners. I do want to highlight though, as we sit here in this cash management piece and this crisis, looking at some of the differences between obviously the 2008 and the 2020 kind of downturn from an economic standpoint. If you look at the 2008, that was caused by obviously some underlying financial issues. There's a lack of overall demand that really ultimately caused that crash. Today as we kind of sit, the really thing that kind of holding us back, and it's real, but it's more just the unknown of the recovery, right? Just in general of when things will get back to normal, which is really kind of dependent on this whole virus, right? The virus spread or what we're hearing in the news now in terms of a vaccine and those type of things is causing the angst. In 2008, we saw disruptions, right? And very large, depending on the industry. In 2020, we're seeing shutdowns of industries, shutdowns of states, shutdowns of global economies, which is something none of us have ever lived through. And we would have to go back to, the Spanish flu in the early 1900s, I guess, to have anything of similar proportions to this. So it's something that we're all going through that's together, that's new. The thing that's starting to obviously grow some angst, and if anybody heard the federal chairman speak yesterday, is just the Federal Reserve has a lot less leverage to pull in 2020 compared to 2008. So it's something to pay attention to. We're starting to see fragile businesses and their situations starting to kind of come to the surface as these articles kind of put forth. So just some things to kind of keep in relative terms into proper context, but it's things that we really need to think about as we kind of go forth and put together this good cash plan. And the one thing, Kyle, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Obviously, you deal with a lot of clients. We got some of these big ones, Gold Gyms here, and J. Crew, and I know J.C. Penney is talking about some of that stuff. But Kyle, through some of the local businesses that you serve, how practical is all the stuff I'm saying? Is it resonating through our local communities here?
Yeah, Brandon. So I guess an example I have is I've been working on this client recently. It's a local restaurant client, and they have multiple locations across Northeast Ohio. And I'm sure everyone's heard this term, the PPP loan or the PPP money. The client just received that money not too long ago, but unfortunately, they found out that the money they received is not going to be forgiven. So I think, in various discussions with the client and the partner on the account and discussions he's had with the client, I think they've talked probably every other day since this quarantine has started. They're trying to figure out not only operationally what are they going to do, but what are they going to do with this money that they have now sitting in their account? Are they just going to give it back because it's not going to be forgiven, or are they going to repay it over the term of the loan? So it's ever changing. So I think, Brandon, if I was a controller or a CFO or an owner, what should I be doing, or what questions should I be asking going forward?
Yeah, that's great. And this is going to really start to kind of pivot our conversation here into, okay, this is where we are, right? But like Americans, especially, here in Ohio, right? We're dealing with OhioX and this great group here. We know how to persevere. So how do we get through that? And I think that's what we want to focus on. Before we kind of get to nitty gritty though, it's let's just focus on some simple questions they're simple questions. I think the answers are a lot harder to think about and really come to a sound conclusion. But three things that I think Kyle and I, as we were preparing for this, really started to resonate with us in terms of, all right, how do you go through and start to put together a solid foundation or a solid idea of a cash management plan, right, to secure your business's future? And I think first and foremost, it starts with understanding the impact to your industry. And I get that we're now about 6 to 8 weeks since the COVID-19 thing started. But have you reassessed that? And what I mean by that is now that things are starting to open up, what is the impact right now on this? And if you think about two different type of industries, paper products, right, in terms of toilet paper and paper towels, their situation from a COVID-19 is completely different than the restaurant and the hospitality. So understanding where you fit into the effects of COVID-19 are extremely important as you start to go through and put together a strategy and a journey kind of to kind of survive this time period. Also, what was the health of your business kind of before all this started? And what the two words I'll throw out there is I would encourage your finance team, your leadership team, as you're going through this question and brainstorming, be honest and be objective. And why Kyle and I thought this was important is don't use COVID-19 necessarily as an excuse of where you are, and indicate that, once COVID-19 is kind of right-sided, our problems will go away. The reason we put this on there is more importantly to get at the root of the cause, right? And that's the whole point of this. I think most businesses will say that, yes, it's COVID-19 related, but really kind of do a hard look in the mirror in terms of where your business's health was before this. Because I think that's really critically important as you think about putting that plan together about how you manage some of these tactics and objectives that we'll talk about later from that piece.
Yeah, so the last part of this is, when will normal return? And as you can see, normal is capitalized on the slide. I think that's what everyone's trying to determine, what is normal, or what will it look like. If I go back to the restaurant example, these guys, they've done their takeout orders is up 40% year over year, which is that what it's going to look like going forward? Or is there going to be less in-person dining? I know there's a bunch of restrictions that will be in place with these restaurants. So I guess, how is that going to look in relation to overall sales and I guess their sales mix? And then I guess a little personal story I have is Cinco de Mayo was not too long ago, and I mean, these Mexican restaurants around the area, they were doing takeout orders of margaritas. So, I mean, everyone's trying to adapt and everyone's trying to adjust to the current situation. So, I mean, we have these three questions now. Brandon, how do we go about coming up with some of these answers?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And just to that last point, it's just so critical that we think about, I know we're not necessarily economists, but getting a sense of when that normal piece will return is just going to be very impactful to kind of how we put that plan together. So, to Kyle's point, those different, restaurant industries, how it's coming back, how you're affected is going to be very important. But what we kind of want to talk about now is starting to get into kind of some of the tactics that we would kind of want to encourage you as business owners, you as leaders to kind of think about. And I know we got a very astute audience here today. And that's where I want to kind of really kind of put ourselves in the position as we talk about this, as you as a financial leader at the kind of the helm of your business. What are the things that you really need to kind of focus on? And Kyle and I think if you can kind of focus on these three things and some of the subset items that we'll talk about, your plan, your approach to cash management and helping your business to secure its future is going to be well on its way to being executed in a strong manner. So the first piece is just, diagnose and triage. And what do we mean by this? A lot of the people here on the call, especially over these last couple of years, have been in some great positions with obviously our economic times. I think now what I would probably challenge everybody on the call here is being able to kind of increase your visibility kind of into some of the specific line items of the business. And what I mean by that is, do you know your current cash position? Shortfalls, where are some of the pain points? Really kind of rolling up your sleeves and kind of refreshing some of the ins and the outs of the business is going to be super critical to kind of putting this plan together from a cash management strategy. Second piece is make cash king. And we've all heard this and everybody's talking about, making cash king, and this concept's not new. What I think I would like everybody to kind of resonate with themselves about this is, are you putting the cash and the cash decision process at the heart of every decision? And what I mean by that is, when you're having your meetings, your strategic meetings, is every employee on the same page? We all talk about, vision and getting everybody on the same page. And for this moment in time, it's more critical than ever that everybody understands the role that every decision has and its effect on cash. So really kind of putting cash really at the heart of every decision across all employees of your organization is critical. And then lastly, communication. We can't stress this enough, and we'll get into why this is so important, but really kind of be able to communicate everything from your plan to the people, to the individual stakeholders from from that piece is going to be super critical. So that's where we kind of want to dive into for a good portion of our conversation here today is these three tactics as we kind of think about putting together a plan from a cash management strategy. So as we think about the first tactic here, increasing our visibility really into the situation, we really think it kind of anchors back to these 5 points. And if we have a good grip on this in terms of understanding the data and where we sit and what our needs are, we're well on our way to starting to build this house up, as we so be it calling it, in terms of our cash management plan. So first piece is just cash, and the key piece here is liquidity. Do you know what your needs are? Do you really understand the cash level that's going to be required over the next 13 weeks, 26 weeks, the next year? Are you really confident on what that looks like on a week in and a week out basis, depending on your situation? Again, everybody's situation is going to be different in terms of this need and the level, but it's super critical to kind of understand those liquidity issues or those liquidity assets that you truly have.
Yeah, so the second part of this is cost. Detailed analysis of our discretionary expenses. I'm sure a lot of us are already doing this already. Are we cutting back in some areas that maybe we weren't before? Are we cutting back on maybe marketing, for example? I know here at Apple Growth Partners, we do a lot of travel for trainings and conferences and meetings. So we're already doing this already. We're doing more online webinars. So can we save money there? And have we truly looked at the detail within what we're spending, and what is that going to look like going forward?
Third piece here that we want to think about is CapEx. Obviously, a very large component, especially as we think about cash outlays, is CapEx, but it's also a needed component to our business. And we'll talk a little bit this more in the back end of our presentation here today. But understanding, obviously, the strategic initiatives behind CapEx, what our business needs in terms of CapEx, and how those kind of all align is important for you, kind of the business owner, to really get a handle on. Another one is supply chain. I think this concept, as we think about cash management and cash flow projections, is a little bit new to the conversation in the sense that, if a business faltered, 4 or 5 years ago, not saying it was directly related to supply chain, but there's probably other internal issues that went on. Nowhere in another situation have we had such a disruption to just business commerce in general, and that includes our supply chains. So the point here is, from a finance leader, and we'll talk a little bit more of this in detail, is do we understand really the challenges that our supply chain, not only are we dealing with, as financial leaders, issues internally, right, inside our 4 walls, but now we got to think about the larger ecosystem that kind of comes here in play and how that kind of affects. So as you think about different type of modeling, as you think about, different type of tactics and communication strategies, how does supply chain kind of play into that plan? So really give that some consideration from the larger scheme of things when things are opening back up. And we're not out of the woods yet for this. So to really kind of understand the long-term aspects of that supply chain.
Yeah, so the last part of this diagnosis and triage slide, financing. What source of funding is available to me? Is it the PPP funding that people have been getting? Have we gone to our bank to see what else is out there in terms of loans? Do we have a line of credit? Do we need to extend those terms on the line of credit? Or do we have other loans on our books that maybe we need to look at with refinancing? Or maybe me as a business owner, am I going to put more money back into the business? And then if I am, where am I getting that money from? Do I have enough to put money back into the business from my savings account, or do I have to potentially maybe take a distribution out of my retirement plan? So those are just some of the things to be thinking about when you're looking at in different funding sources. So I guess now that we're looking at this diagnosis and triage, what can we do, or how do we get into going into putting this into action?
Yeah, great question, Kyle. And that's where we kind of make the shift here from, stage one, our first kind of tactic of diagnosing and triaging our situation, right? Now we're going to start to make cash king, right? And we're going to anchor this in this section to kind of 3 points. And the first one is the 13-week cash flow modeling. It can be 13 weeks, 26 weeks, whatever. The point here is it needs to be detailed, and it needs to be a specific tool. It's, the thing I'd like to share is think of it this way. Last week I ordered mulch for my house and was trying to get it laid here before we obviously had our mini snowstorms here in May. But my 4-year-old was trying to help me and loves to help me with the different yard work around, and was trying to get his shovel out of the shed or whatever, and ended up grabbing a snow shovel that we had put away. And he's sitting there trying to scoop it in, and getting more frustrated because obviously it's not the right tool for the job. You didn't get the right tool to help him kind of get through that project. And it's the same way I kind of think about here is if we're going to use the wrong tools, or we're going to use the same tools that we always had in this COVID-19 world in terms of projections, it could cause more frustration. So really kind of brush off how you do that, and think about the different scenarios. The one story I shared with Kyle that just kind of blew my mind was out of a recent survey out of a CFO Drive of just CFOs and CEOs in their cash modeling here in COVID-19. 42% of them had indicated that their scenario modeling, right, did not take into effect a relapse or basically a resurgence of the virus in 6 months or a year from now. And that just kind of blew my mind as we think about all the type of news blurbs out there right now. Whether it be sports, the sports leagues, whether it be schools, whether it be businesses in general, we're all talking about the possibility of opening too soon. Yet here we are as some business leaders, at least through this survey, saying 42% don't even do that type of scenario modeling. So key there is just make sure it's flexible and it's got the scenarios that truly reflect today, right? And be honest about what those situations are, and look for those aha moments. I'd really encourage everybody just to kind of hop over. We had just kind of successfully launched, thanks to Brittany White and her marketing team, a simple 10-question quiz. It's nothing complex. You don't need any of your financial data in front of you, but really kind of where do you assess? And that's one great starting one great tool to kind of really help lead you in the right direction. So think about how you're doing modeling and if you have the right tool kind of in place. Second thing I would challenge everybody with is think about, a cash champion or an office of cash. This may be the treasury function if you're large enough to have one, but as we think about, again, are we putting cash at the heart of every decision? One of the things I came across, that I thought was a great idea was, do you have one centralized person in charge of, or at least vetting all of this through? You're going to be working really hard to put this cash plan together. But at the same point, not everybody's going to have the level of expertise or the visibility that you will. So how do you kind of control that? And this is one way to do it, is making sure that there truly is a cash champion, whether it's yourself or a designated person that can evaluate this. And, educating our employees is going to be super critical in that. If we're a manufacturing and we got some great frontline workers that are helping produce our product, or, buyers, we really got to make sure everybody's on the same page, shared vision here over the next couple of weeks of why it's super critical. So think about that in terms of, designating somebody like of that role to help with your effort. And the last thing is measuring. It's super important. Back to the slide that we had just talked about earlier, right? And the diagnosing and triage. A lot of this stuff is data collection, right? And understanding where we sit. To us as finance leaders, that's important, but what's really important is turning that data into information. And talking about KPIs and dashboards is going to be, super critical from that aspect. So really going back to those 3 questions that Kyle and I opened with, what are your needs? What is your specific situation? Why are you having cash issues? The reason you need to ask those questions, and the reason we started with this, is it starts to help build your story. It starts to help build what we need to design to give you the tools to kind of succeed, and making sure that you have that speed and that accuracy to pivot and make the right decisions from that standpoint. So really kind of think about how you're measuring all of this, week in and week out, to allow, us as finance leaders to make the, the critical decisions that we need to make. So where this starts to then unfold here into kind of the second part of our Making Cash King and putting this at the heart of all their decisions is the different type of levers we can kind of take. And we've kind of broken this up in here into the 3, the operations, working capital, and then, other cash sources. And we're going to go through some different tactics here. So the intention here is again, understanding what your business needs. Not all of these will apply directly to everyone here on this call, but what we're hoping is within these three buckets, you can kind of take some of these practices again, back to your teams, back to your modeling that you guys are doing, and think about, hey, how can we get a little bit better for tomorrow if we kind of focus on some of these different areas. So we're going to kind of walk through some of these. So as we think about operations, we wanted to kind of cover on four points that we thought were going to be important for everybody here. We talked about managing supply chain, and I want to pick up where from that earlier conversation. The one piece that we need to think about is the different tiers, or the different basically inputs into our supply chain, and then upstream and downstream. Even if we sit in Ohio, or we sit in a state that's able to start to produce, right? We've had shutdowns lifted and we can get back to work. If our key supplier or our supplier's supplier is sitting in New York or California, somewhere where there's still heavy restrictions, that's going to drastically affect how we do business. So again, when we talk about the whole ecosystem, and we'll get to this here at the last one, but when you talk about this whole ecosystem, how are you managing that? Or how are you looking at different alternatives for that? So that's something super critical as you think about your different cash flow modelings to kind of think about. Variable costs, just evaluating costs in general. I think Kyle covered some great ones in terms of the travel bans, essential meetings, hiring freezes, conferences. We've all heard those, right? A couple other ones we would want to kind of indicate to you that you may want to take a look at is do you have a lot of contract labor? Have you looked at any type of contractual labor? Do we have an ability to maybe take our permanent workforce, cross-train them in hopes to avoid any type of layoffs or furloughs as production comes back? So that might be one way to, again, save some additional costs from that standpoint. If you haven't done so, think about, working with the employees, and this will come with our communication piece at the end, but working with employees to possibly take some different, leave, right? If we have built up PTO or some different vacation, have we worked with our employees on taking some of that so we can kind of continue operations? I think a lot of that stuff has been flushed out. But as business kind of starts to kind of enter this new chapter, what does that look like? This will go back to your cash flow modeling that we talked about, but what does production look like? I was just on a phone call with a client the other day. 3 weeks ago, he said, oh yeah, by mid-May, we'll start to be kind of ticking up production wise. We'll start to at least get back to some level of operational, status. And I touched base with him yesterday, and now he's revised his forecast, which is good, but it's negative, right? And it's those type of things in terms of reevaluating and those costs that are going to be critical in that model. Have you thought about alternative revenue sources? If you're not the Ford or the GM that's been awarded government contracts to make ventilators, that shouldn't preclude us from having a brainstorming session of how else can we get creative with our staff and with our machinery to look at some different opportunities that are out there that won't cost us a ton in type of retooling or relearning. But I think sometimes we don't realize how talented our workforce is, how talented our people are on the floor or out in the service line to kind of make some of those pivots. And sometimes those best ideas obviously are coming from those individuals. So really, again, engage them to see what alternative sources could be out there that could be a part of the solution and really helping from the cash flow piece. Now, lastly, thinking outside these four walls, and this was kind of eye-opening to me as I've been on some of these different webinars. And again, we're in such a weird place from the sense of we're all going through this together, right? And it's not just company A that has cash issues. It's company A through ZZ, and we need to realize that, empathize with that, but then also figure out as business owners, finance leaders, how can we keep our businesses moving? And, how can we think outside just our problems? So like one idea is, is there any type of, if you're in a situation of a joint venture with a special supplier or a special, even a competitor, I heard in the one example that I was on a few weeks ago, to, again, if it's a critical part, does that make sense for that time period? Again, no idea should be off limits in these brainstorming sessions, because again, we're trying to figure out how to survive this time and then thrive. So think about these four ideas when we're talking about operations in the larger scheme of making cash king. Working capital obviously goes hand in hand with operations, but what are some different things that we can kind of do here? First thing is just really make sure we understand the cash conversion cycle, up and down. do we know kind of where some of the choke points are? Where are some of the higher risks? It's important to kind of identify these so we can kind of start to focus our strategy and our approach to kind of improving those, or mitigating those, to again help improving cash flow. So really kind of understand what that conversion cycle is, and there also obviously is a projection piece in there in terms of how does that change. If you have a large concentration of customers, say in a metropolitan area such as Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York, how does that change? So it's really understanding kind of that cash conversion cycle and how it applies directly to your industry. This next one is trifecta, the trifecta group and the balance sheet. And what I relate this to is obviously the AR, inventory, and AP. Really, you cannot talk about cash flow management, strong cash management, strong liquidity by isolating any one of those. So really be able to treat and talk about those in the same manner. So specifically, what are some things we can do? We've all talked about receivables and expediting receivables, but what does that really mean? Like, sure, we would all love to speed up our receivables. But what is the current process? Our AR teams, how are they changing? I'm encouraging and challenging everybody on this call to, change the way we're looking at our problems from a different lens, from this COVID-19 lens. How have we challenged the teams that help support us in terms of these collections, whether it's our AR team or an accounting manager? How have they changed their processes, talking with the customers from that piece? Are they trying to work towards a solution of getting some type of payment in the door? So think about that from a receivable standpoint. From the payables, how's your communication level, with your suppliers? Just as I indicated from the receivable speed, right? We want to speed those up. On the payables, sure, we want to extend those. But you got to understand on the other side, since we're all in this together, you have, I'm coaching that same client to, again, engage you to speed up your, payables. So really think about your suppliers and figuring out and communicating a plan that may work for you, right? And figuring out a plan that works in the grander scheme of that cash management system. So the key there is really just the communication piece from payables. And then inventory management. I had a story pretty close to home. Got a family member that's in the dental industry. And obviously they've been hit hard and they had to close their shops down, and they're beginning to open up, even though they're one of the highest risk industries. But what they were encouraged to do during the shutdown was to send all their supplies, their gloves, their masks, their shields up to the hospitals, up to the clinic, Metro, UH, which is great. That's a great gesture. However, the point with inventory management here is they didn't have a plan in place. And so what happened was as these places are opening back up, some of the dentist offices didn't oblige to this voluntary ask, and they have gear, like they're operating. And some of these other places, they can't get it. It's such a critical need. It's obviously going to our much needed healthcare providers on the front line in the hospitals. But these dental places did not have a plan in place to kind of manage some of that. So really think about that. It's something that, Michael Ryan over at the Inventory Iceberg Crusher Group has really helped me kind of better understand, especially in this COVID-19 world over the last couple of weeks, what that looks like. But really kind of think about how you manage that inventory piece, which is going to be critical. And then lastly, transaction audits. In my previous world, I worked with a lot of public companies, SOX audits. That's a page that I would maybe even consider us as privately held companies or smaller organizations take out of, how are you auditing your payables and your receivables? What's that process? Perfect example is do we really know what we're paying for some of these vendors? And, there's a lot of great organizations out there that can help us with that, but want to make sure, since we're focusing on cash and making cash at heart at every decision, do we really know what we're paying? And an audit process or a transaction audit log can be a step in the right direction to make sure that those vendors that we're paying, those suppliers, are getting paid the correct amount per our contracts. And then the last piece that we want to cover here is just some of the other cash sources. And Kyle covered some of these in terms of the viable financing sources. We got line of credit, we got our term loans, we got this huge just lump of now stimulus money. But how does that all kind of come together? More importantly, the question I would ask everybody here is, if you have Q2 debt covenants coming up in June, how are those trending? Does your model help project that? Some of the banker friends that Kyle and I have talked to here, they've rubber stamped basically any compliance issues for Q1, right? That would be pretty bad if they were doing those. But from the risk office looking at Q2, some tough decisions are going to need to be made. So my advice to you is about 6 weeks out, make sure you have a firm grasp of what that looks like and talking with your bank of what that situation may mean for you. So think about those financing sources from that aspect. CapEx, we talked a little bit about this. Let's pick that conversation back up here too. Obviously, depending on the industry, you really got to balance the business need, right? In terms of replacing your machine, that infusion that we need to keep our operations going versus what can be suspended or put off to a different time. That's a tough decision. But my question is has that process been done? Have you looked at that capital expenditure strategic plan, and what is the action going to be coming from there? I would say it's not a prudent decision just to totally cut CapEx, because you could be actually putting yourself in a worse position on a critical machine shutdown. So really think about how you've managed and will continue to manage CapEx through this process. Alternative financing options. One option to get cash in the door is factoring. Obviously, it comes at a cost. I get that. But if we're in a situation for cash, have we thought about that? Do we know which weeks we're going to be short on cash, or what months we're going to be short on cash? Again, that's where the model comes in. That's where all that planning and those decisions come into critical decisions of, does that even make sense for us? And if so, when? Have we thought about, when we think about, selling and producing, have we talked about to our business development teams, the people out there helping us sell that product, about dynamic discounting, something that maybe we have not done in the past, but encouraging more volume build to, again, get some more cash in the door? Have we thought about different plans like that could be creative to, again, get some more cash in there? And then the last one is business interruption. I think we've all heard about this, but I truly believe we're just at the tip of the iceberg. My 4-year-old, again, can kind of relate to this because of the Mitchell ice cream. If anybody's followed in the news, Mitchell ice cream was one of the first ones to file a claim for business interruption, saying that they've been affected. I'm not a lawyer, but talking through this, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I think that's why most businesses are like in a wait and see mode for that precedence. So the takeaway here is to kind of brush off that policy and talk to your counsel and figure out where that stands. What does that mean for you? How do you have to prove damages from that aspect, and start to kind of think about and have those conversations? Because again, we're talking about cash management here. We've been affected. We've gotten less cash. That's why we bought this insurance. So let's see, what, if anything, kind of applies to us from that end. So that kind of takes us through the second kind of tactic we've talked about, making cash king, putting that at the heart of all of our decisions. The last tactic we want to kind of shift over to here is an important one, is the communication aspect, and why communication is so strong. So Kyle, I want to bring this back into you, since you've been obviously in the field here the last couple of weeks, working with clients, especially around the different PPP. What have you been hearing? What are some best practices, and what do you kind of encourage our audience here today to kind of focus on?
Yeah, so before I go into the importance part of this communication slide, I know we're all trying to find some light at the end of the tunnel, and then moments of maybe some things we'll look back on and say, wow, that's pretty funny with what was going on versus what it will be in the future. So an example I have is this meme I saw probably a month ago. It says, I guess we'll really see what was once an hour-long meeting, what could have been just an email. So I thought that was pretty funny when I saw that. So now if I go into the important part of this slide, the first part is organization. Who are we communicating within our organization? Is it our employees? Are we being transparent? I know a buzzword we hear probably every half hour is uncertainty. And then another example I have is, so it's not necessarily in relation to our employees, but it has to do with communication and uncertainty. So 2 weeks ago, I literally had to ship toilet paper to my grandparents in Florida at their retirement home. I'm like, nowhere in my 30 years would I ever have thought I would have to ship toilet paper to my grandparents in Florida. But I guess if I go back to my buzzword uncertainty, I mean, if me as an employee is uncertain where I can get toilet paper, how uncertain am I with where I am in my career. So I think it's very important that you as business leaders need to be communicating with your employees. People involved in your cash process, we just said cash is king. Do those people know what your expectations are as leaders, as business owners, and obviously probably our processes have changed as we've been alluding, as we've said before. Do they understand why it's changed? And then going back to our cash champions, we've identified these cash champions, and now how do we communicate to those people in charge of those areas? Do they fully understand why, and have they communicated down to their staff? So that's some of the examples I have for communication down to an organization. Now, Brandon, I'll kick it back over to you for governance.
Yeah, and I wanted to put this on here is we're talking about communication, and in crisis, we always talk about, I think about, verbal communication and through the different methods that Kyle's been talking about. But I think the written communication is just as important. Think about the processes and controls that you have over a lot of your cash functions. How has that changed? Your reporting process, how has that changed? Again, obviously, a lot of what we do is CPA and financial statement items, and a lot of articles we're following from our regulators are, what are the controls that companies have taken to kind of adapt to this working from home environment. And the compliance side aside, what the point is here is how have you communicated to your employees through processes, through controls, your cash management vision, right? And how can they, without you having to be everywhere, how can they get that information? So think about that in terms of how we're communicating, not only through our webinars or any type of company town hall meetings, but how can we communicate through some different written material to help everybody kind of keep on point from that standpoint?
All right, great. Yeah, and then the last part is external communication. I think we beat this up pretty good, but some examples are banks. We've gone back to those sources of financing. Another example would be our advisors, to your CPAs, your lawyers, etc. Do they really know what keeps you up at night? I know us as advisors, like Brandon and I, we may have a good idea of what maybe your pain points be, but we're obviously not down there in the trenches with you on the day-to-day. So, and then vice versa, are your advisors keeping you in the loop with new laws, regulations? Obviously, we see it's changing daily, not just with laws and regulations from a business standpoint, but also accounting rules. What is out there and what are our options? So another example would be our stakeholders, we've said before. Brandon's also said your suppliers, your customers. If we extend our terms on our payables, and then on the other side, our customers extending terms with us. So those are just some of the external examples that you should be thinking about as you're obviously going through your communication process. So, okay, Brandon, we've listed who we should potentially be communicating with, and we've given this long list of things to think about. I mean, where the heck do we start with all this?
And we wanted to kind of simplify this, and that's why as you're going back through this, kind of pull this whole presentation together. But first and foremost, form that crisis team. We talked about, the cash champion team. Think about your COVID-19 response team. But how does that all come together? And I think most importantly is defining those roles in this crisis. Really putting the people in charge that are going to help manage the cash through this situation is going to be critical to help implement, obviously, your vision, your strategy, as you think about, securing your business's future through a cash management journey. Next is just evaluate your situation. We talked about those 3 questions up front. Really make sure you understand those and really take the time to use that diagnosing and triaging of your specific situation. Every business is going through different points, and from here on out, people will recover in different ways. So understand and try as best as you can. Everybody here knows their company better than anybody, how that looks like, the needs of your company, okay? Then develop a process, right? And I'll leave 2 pieces here. Develop some type of model or some type of system that can help you kind of evaluate that kind of going over there. But then also don't leave out the point of monitoring, right? And who kind of monitors that, whether it's through KPIs, whether it's through some dashboards, whether it's through, meeting cadences. Figure out how you're going to, track and then monitor that. And then last, and I think this is the most important piece, is assess and then reassess. This stuff is so fluid, whether it be the PPP process, whether it be government agencies, opening or closing different things. You got to be flexible to be able to assess, reassess, and your process needs to be just as, flexible and nimble. to kind of incorporate that. So think about those type of things as you're kind of going through. So I know we're running right up here against time, so I know we're going to open up this for questions. Kyle, before we do, did you just have like one kind of key takeaway that you want to kind of like leave the group here with?
Yeah, I guess I'll just go back to that last tactic I guess we have is communication. I mean, we're all receiving probably 1 million emails related to COVID. And I mean, it's hard to tell what's important, what's not important. So I think we just need to stress that you guys need to be really in communication with your advisors, and then your advisors need to be in communication with you. So we can all just be on the same page and know what's really important and what's just, I guess, information out there.
That's great advice. Communication can never be understated from that standpoint. The one thing I'll leave you with is just act now. Obviously, every business is different, but hopefully everybody can take something away from here and better their organizations for tomorrow. Whether that be through different type of transaction audits, whether it be enhancing your 13-week model, whether it be establishing a cash champion kind of position. Take some action now because we are in such a different world to help kind of lead through kind of this segment. So that's what we kind of want to leave with. Chris, we'll bring you back into the conversation here. That's kind of our prepared remarks and what we wanted to kind of share with everybody today. Again, I hope everybody kind of took something from it. I didn't know, Chris, if we had a few time here to take any type of questions that may be out there.
We do, and thank you, Brandon and Kyle. That was really nice, well thought out, and informative presentation. I've curated a couple that have come my way. If others would like to ask some as well, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can also raise your hand on the Zoom feature to ask it out loud. But the first one that I've gathered is, are you seeing clients or businesses in an effort to save on expensive long-term, not renewing leases or downsizing their physical office location in order to allow employees to continue working from home full-time or part-time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I even know our space that we lease out of the Beechwood office, some of those discussions were being had. But I think here's the thing: as executives and leaders of our organizations, we cannot ignore the fact that through this situation, we may have discovered that our business can continue to operate and still be productive through working from home and some different situations. So I think that conversation is going to be much more fluid over the coming months to see if you can kind of reduce that cost. Because if you can, again, get same output and your customers and your clients are still receiving the satisfaction and their products in the same course and the vision that you're trying to do, you have to be prudent to look into that option. And there's a lot of studies and papers already being written on that, and that could be a very viable option for a lot of people out there to kind of think about the new working environment, right? And what that may look like going forward.
Yeah, and I think I'll just jump in there. I guess, I mean, me, myself, I'm just thinking about that. I mean, if we look at the different departments in this, at Apple Growth, we have audit and tax, and a lot of us as auditors, we're out on site at clients, I wouldn't say majority of the time, but a lot of the time. So, I mean, can Apple Growth potentially, downsize if we're seeing that we're fully capable of doing these Zoom meetings, these Skype meetings, et cetera? Do we need the physical locations going forward? Or at least do we need as much?
Great, thank you. And a second question that we had gotten in, with what we've learned and seen from the first round of PPP, if there are additional rounds, what are things that we know now, lessons learned, I guess, to keep in mind as additional and future loans are considered?
That's a great question. I think take time to just pause and really kind of understand as best as we can everything that's going on with the law. The PPP obviously had a lot of nuances. They had to roll it out very quickly. But I think we all got caught up with the shiny object dangling in front of our faces in terms of the loan forgiveness, which obviously is real. It's out there. But I think there's a lot of things when you started to ask the question, right? The next question, asking, why, 3 or 4 times to really get at the root cause, that allowed some business owners to then pause and really kind of think about if it was right for them. I feel bad. I really do feel bad for some of those restaurants that obtained PPP loans, in that first tranche in early April and weren't able to open up here till, 5 or 6 weeks later. From a forgiveness standpoint, that just didn't make sense for them. So I think the thing I would probably advise in these future tranches is making sure we really gather the information quickly, but then take a moment to pause and really ask the tough question of does it make sense for us, is what I'd probably encourage going forward.
Yeah, and I think, just to add on, I guess it's not only just the rules that are out there and getting these loans or this PPP funding. I mean, you see some of these larger ones that qualified for it, receive the money like Shake Shack, but then get torn apart in social media for taking the money. So I think business owners also need to think what could potentially be that could impact them as well. So that we as, business advisors may not think about on our end.
Great. Well, thank you, Brandon and Kyle. And we're coming close to 1 hour for your presentation. So I just wanted to thank both of you for the insights you shared today and the work that you all are doing at Apple Growth Partners. Brandon and Kyle's information, contact, email, and phone are located on the screen. So please, if you have any additional follow-up questions, consider reaching out to them directly. But everyone, thank you for joining today. This has been a really nice conversation with a couple good questions at the end there on cash management, especially as we're navigating post and during coronavirus. So Brandon and Kyle, thank you very much. And everyone else, thank you for being in attendance today. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.